Hello, everybody. This is Bill Kroger. I'm president of the Houston Bar Association. We have a really exciting and important program for you today with Chris Hollins, who is our Harris County Clerk. And with me is Krisina Zuñiga, who is the president of the Houston Young Lawyers Association. The topic today is how both the Houston Bar Association and the Houston Young Lawyers Association, along with law students at the Houston Law Schools, are putting together a project to volunteer to be election workers during the upcoming election. And as Chris is going to explain, there is a need for workers for this election more than in the past. Part of this is due to the interest in the election, and a lot of it's due to COVID-19. We depend a lot on older workers to help with the manning of our polls, but we think that with COVID-19, there might be fewer of those types of volunteers than in the past. And so this year, the Houston Bar Association and the Houston Young Lawyers Association want to step up and provide some assistance so that we have as smooth of an election as possible. I want to kick it over to Krisina, who has been just wonderful working with the Houston Bar and with her membership on so many important activities in the community in the last several months, and we're glad to have her here today.
Thank you, Bill, for having me, and thank you for those kind words. And thank you, Chris, for joining us. We're so grateful for your time. My name's Krisina Zuñiga, and I'm the president of the Houston Young Lawyers Association, HYLA, this year. And we're thrilled to partner with the HBA and the Harris County Clerk's office to facilitate our members' volunteer time with the county clerk's office for the upcoming election. Our members are young lawyers and hopefully well situated to do this work, both as lawyers and as young people who are less at risk of getting infected with the coronavirus. So we encourage you to listen to this information and to go out and help this November. Chris, I'll just start by asking you to introduce yourself and tell our listeners a little bit about your role.
Absolutely. I'm Chris Hollins. I am an attorney here in the Houston area. I own a small plaintiff shop situated on the west side of town. But since June 1st of this year, I've served as Harris County Clerk. And in that role, in addition to providing critical services like legal records and property records and vital statistics to the people of Harris County, I also serve as the Chief Elections Officer, and I think that's what we're here to talk about today. And so as we're moving towards what's going to be a very momentous election in November, we expect it to be the largest election in the history of Harris County. Right now, we have over 2.4 million registered voters, and we're expecting record turnout. But because of that, and in order to be able to deliver a safe and accessible a fair and transparent election to all of the voters of Harris County. To facilitate such a record election, we need a record number of locations. We're going to have over 120 election locations during the early voting period and over 800 voting centers on election day. And to have a record number of voting centers, we need a record number of election workers to join us. And so at minimum, we're going to need 8,000 election workers. We may need as many as 12,000. And so we're looking for folks who can join us and to be a part of this team that's going to be delivering safe elections to the people of Harris County. And so I'll pause there because I know you're probably going to ask some detailed questions. But I think the reason that we're here today is to talk to you all today about how to get involved and potentially serve as election workers.
Let me ask the first question. Can you describe the kind of workers that you're looking for in terms of what they do? And also, is this a partisan responsibility or is it nonpartisan?
So election workers are folks of all shapes and sizes from across Harris County. The only requirement is that you be a registered voter. And in fact, we even have a program for 16 and 17-year-olds in high school who aren't registered to vote just yet, that you not be convicted of an election-related felony. So even ex-felons from other walks of life are still welcome as election workers. and that you not be associated with any of the campaigns. You can be a member of a party, but not be, a staffer or relative of a candidate. Those are the only qualifications, in terms of bare minimum. But, what we're looking for is folks to serve at voting centers, right, at the polling sites, to help and facilitate these elections. And so you're doing things like greeting voters at the door, making sure that they have access to masks if they show up without one, checking their IDs and processing them through to allow them to vote. But overall, just accommodating the voter and making their voting process as plain and simple and as fast and as safe as possible. And so, what that looks like on election day, for example, election day is, polls open at 7 a.m. and they close at 7 p.m. That means election workers get there at around 5:30 in the morning and leave, at 8 or 9, but potentially even later if there is a long line as we're closing down at 7. I can tell you that any lawyer would qualify to do this work. Folks who we're especially looking for, are those who are thoughtful and proactive. A lot of the issues that you see faced at a voting center on any given day are not rocket science to solve, but you need to be paying attention, and you need to have the intention of making this a smooth process for the voter and have a client-friendly or customer-friendly approach to your work.
Does it pay?
Yes. So this is paid work at minimum $17 an hour for recently graduated attorneys who haven't started, their work at the firms just yet. This can be a nice check for October and November. Early voting is a 3-week long period. And so there's the opportunity to work starting October 13th all the way through October 30th. But then there's also the choice of only working on November 3rd on election day, because I know many attorneys have very busy schedules and probably can't take off a full 3 weeks to do this work. In addition, there's a required training that's about 4 hours, and you're also paid for that training. And so again, it is a good way to pay a few bills. One thing that I've spoken with you about, Bill, is that for certain organizations like the Houston Bar Association, many attorneys say, look, I'm not looking to make $17 an hour, but we could set up a program with the Houston Bar Association whereby you donate, your salary to an associated nonprofit. And so that's an option that we're working on as well for those who don't need the money but still would like to serve.
Thank you, Chris. You talked a little bit about the commitment on election day and what those hours look like. What about if you're helping with early voting?
So with early voting, the days are similar in length. The key difference is that there's an option to do shift work. And so instead of, it's a 7-day-a-week operation, and many of the election workers work the entire time from 5:30 a.m. to 9 p.m. every day for a few weeks straight. But there's also the option to work in shifts. And so, you would come in for an 8-hour shift and so on and so forth. And that's managed by the election judge at each polling site. And so there are different options that are accommodated by different judges. But if you had a preference for how you'd like to work, that can be sort of placed into the system, as it were, in terms of choosing which site that you would work at under which election judge.
And that was actually going to be my next question about polling site preferences. Are those honored or are people assigned?
So the way that it works by law is that the parties choose who the election judges are. And in each precinct, there's a question of, in the last election for governor, did that precinct vote Democrat or Republican? And so based on the results of that, you'll either have a Democratic or Republican presiding judge there, but then you'll also have an alternate judge from the opposite party. That presiding judge then chooses the clerks. And so, there are oftentimes, they're choosing from people that they know, but many of these judges who are new, and again, we're in this situation now where we need a record number of election workers, they'll be choosing from a list. And in looking at that list, they'll be able to see, the zip codes of workers and so on and so forth in choosing who they are associated with. But again, in working with organizations like the Houston Bar Association and HYLA, we can flag your workers in particular to make sure that they are selected and promoted to the election judges to be chosen. And also, if it's your preference that they work in pairs, for example, we can make sure that 2 of them are chosen at a time for particular voting sites.
How do you apply for one of these jobs?
That's a great question. And so where everyone starts is harrisvotes.com/election workers. Again, harrisvotes.com/election workers. And there you fill out a form of interest and you're automatically placed into the system to begin doing background checks and so on and so forth.
When you apply for a position, do you get to select, or do you get a preference as to where you go or what precinct you might be in?
You don't. You do enter your address information, and so that information is known by us. But initially, you wouldn't be able to select any sort of preference.
Chris, what's the training like?
The training is it's a fully virtual training, especially now in the time of COVID, and so it is a very long Zoom call. I've attended multiple of these sessions myself, and especially for someone who hasn't been an election worker before, it actually is quite informative, and you'll learn quite a bit. But I would compare it to virtual CLEs, some of which are very interesting and some of which might be less so. But having gone through my first round of this in July, we flagged training as something that we need to be improving. From the quality, I would say, is already quite high, but in terms of engagement and ensuring content, knowledge, and acquisition by the folks who are taking the course, we're making improvements. And so I think for the folks who experienced training in October and November of this year, you'll see quite a bit of an improvement from the content in July.
And you talked about the minimum qualifications to be an election worker. Are there any skills that are especially valued in election workers, say having language skills or legal knowledge, things like that? Are you especially looking for people with certain skills that they can bring to the table?
Being bilingual is very important. And so any folks who have language skills, you can certainly serve. And frankly, we talked about preferences of locations. For folks with certain language backgrounds, there are locations that we would preference for you because we know that voters in that area speak those languages. And so that would be great to know. In terms of legal skills, I would say, while helpful, all other things being equal, we're going to provide you in the training with all of what you need to know from a legal perspective. And we share that information with all of our election workers. And so we don't need anyone to be, a voting rights guru or anything like that. I know that, our office certainly takes a lens of wanting to expand voting rights and make sure that everyone can have their voices heard at the polls. And so, if that's your intention, which is to accommodate voting for the people of Harris County, versus turning people away, we strongly prefer those who are accommodating our voters.
How do you make sure that the work is going to be safe this year? Like, what special precautions are you taking?
That's a great question as well, Bill. During this time, especially now that we're experiencing this second wave of COVID-19 across Harris County and across Texas, we need to be especially alert and on guard as it relates to safety. And in our office, it's our number one priority to ensure that voters, but especially election workers who are going to be showing up day in and day out, are being protected and are being safe and don't have to make a choice between their health and safety and serving their community or as a voter, your health and safety and your constitutional rights. And so, if you voted in July, you saw that voting centers looked a little bit different than what you had been accustomed to. As you approach the voting center, you would see bright red X's marking out 6 feet along the path so that voters who were waiting in line were respecting social distancing. You saw that as you got closer to the voting center, there was a curbside buzzer for voters from the disabilities community, but also those who might be having symptoms or those who are uncomfortable going inside for other reasons, potentially not being able to wear a mask for health reasons or something like that. You could press that curbside buzzer and have an election worker come out to you personally, and you could vote from outdoors. The election workers themselves, full PPE, masks, face shields, gloves if you need them, access to as much hand sanitizer as you could possibly want. The voters, as you're checking in, first of all, the voters are provided with hand sanitizer. Second, they're separated from the election workers by plexiglass when they're showing their voter ID. And we established a method of checking voter ID without physically touching it to further reduce any contamination. And then from there, the voter's given a finger cover and a sanitizing wipe so that they can operate all of the voting machines and check-in equipment without physically touching it. But that sanitizing wipe is still there for comfort and safety to wipe down the voting machines as well as any other high-touch surfaces before and after use. And that's, again, for the safety of the voter, but also for the safety of our election workers who are doing this critical work at this time.
That process will probably cause some delay that you haven't had in the past. I think we have also talked before this call about the fact that this will be an election where there's not straight party voting. Mm-hmm. What impact would those things have on election night in terms of the lines and the need for workers?
Yes, I mean, frankly, from an operational standpoint, the lack of straight ticket voting will be much more of a bottleneck than anything safety related. The additional steps for safety might cost you 15 seconds. But the fact that voting that could have been done in 30 seconds before will now take 15 minutes if you're going to vote the entire ballot, that's going to be the issue. And to be frank with you, we don't know just yet how big of an impact that's going to have, because we don't know how many voters are going to vote the whole ballot versus, president and I'm out of here, right? And that variable will play a role, and we'll learn that as we see people begin to vote on the first day of early voting on October 13th and be able to make adjustments. But we certainly are preparing for the potential for long lines. But we're doing things to combat that. Number one, we're having, again, more locations than we've ever had before. We're having more voting machines than we've ever had before. One of the benefits of Harris County being behind the curve on getting new elections equipment is that we've been able to get every other county's election equipment that they've moved on from. And so in this election, for the first time, we're going to have about 50% more voting machines because we've taken Fort Bend's machines as well as Travis County's machines. And we'll be using those for this fall and this fall only, because we're already in the process of procuring our next generation of voting machines.
Chris, is there a deadline by which to sign up to be an election worker?
So, I mean, to be frank, we'll be recruiting all the way to the very last day because we want to have as many potential workers on call as possible in case of emergency, in case of dropouts, or anything like that. I mean, we were fortunate that during July, there was only one instance where, because of COVID reasons, we had to, well, we didn't have to, but we took the precautionary step of removing an entire set of election workers and replacing them with an entirely new set. One thing I didn't mention to you, Bill, was these protocols that we have in place. For our workers, we have temperature checks every morning. You're being asked the standard list of questions about your exposure and your travels and things like that. And if you don't pass those tests, you're sent home, and we follow Harris County public health protocols. But if there's some other sort of step of someone tests positive or someone has known exposure to someone who tests positive, we have, sort of a graduated system of steps that we take to keep those election workers safe. And so what happened at one location in July was that we had one positive case. And so we immediately sent everyone home, replaced them with a new crew for the following day, and got them all testing. And fortunately, none of the other workers tested positive. But it's because of quick action on our part and being able to follow these stringent protocols that we have in place for safety. But for that reason, we need, again, even more workers in reserve. But we do want you to not wait. We want you to apply today so that we can place our best workers, like our young lawyers and our less young lawyers in election sites across Harris County, and have you at the top of our list versus as a reserve.
Chris, thank you again for your time and this helpful information. If people have more questions, where should they go?
Again, as it relates to this, just go to harrisvotes.com/election workers. Not only is the application there, but there's also, there are also FAQs, and you can follow up. And look, you can follow with me personally. My email address is chollins@cco.hctx.net. And if I don't have the answer quickly, I'm happy to forward you to the right person who does have the answer. But again, it's going to be a massive operation, potentially 10 or 12,000 workers here in the fall. And so we have quite a team built up to accommodate the recruitment, the training, and the equipment and empowering of those workers.
Thank you very much for being here. Let me just add one final comment, and that is that I don't know of any organizations in this city that are doing more to help people in the city of Houston right now with the impacts caused by COVID-19 than the Houston Young Lawyer Association and the Houston Bar Association. We are working with the Houston Food Bank, with the blood banks, with communities and schools. We're working with the district courts and trying to restart up the grand juries and civil trials. We're doing work with organizations like the Houston Volunteer Lawyers to help out with evictions. And now we're working with the county clerk on elections. If you want to get involved in your community, reach out to one of us. We need all the members we can. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank y'all so much.
Thank you.